Section 1. The landing that was supposed to be easy. September 15, 1944. Off the coast of Peleliu, Western Caroline Islands. The morning sun rises over a sea so bright it blinds the eye, glittering across the armored deck of USS Harris. The air tastes of diesel, salt, and nerves. Lieutenant Richard Horvath of the 1st Marine Regiment wipes sweat from his brow as he leans out from the side of the transport, staring toward the volcanic mass of Peleliu. It looks small, insignificant, just another speck in a war of thousands. But even from here, he can see the jagged spine of coral and limestone ridges running like scars across its heart. The Marines had been told this would take 3 days. Maybe 4, General Rupertus had insisted. A short, sharp blow. Nothing like Tarawa, nothing like Saipan. Just clear the island, secure the airfield, move onward toward the Philippines. Horvath hears the metallic clatter as Navy gunners load another round into a 5-inch mount. The naval bombardment has been going on for days. The guns of the battleships Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Mississippi have torn Peleliu's surface into a haze of smoke and drifting coral dust. Every explosion sends up geysers of pulverized earth and flame. If you didn't know better, you'd think no man could possibly live through that. But Horvath does know better. He adjusts the strap of his M1 and mutters, "If I were Japanese, I'd be underground." Below, LCVPs slap against the swell, their coxswains yelling over the engines. Marines begin climbing down the rope nets. The tension is palpable. Jokes stop, conversations fade. A chaplain moves silently down the line, tapping shoulders, offering a murmured prayer. The order finally echoes over the deck. First wave load. Horvath swings into a landing craft as the klaxon wails. The white spray smashes against the bow ramp while the armada churns forward. Overhead, Hellcats and Avengers streak across the sky, diving to strafe and bomb what little seems left of the island. Then, like a curtain lifting, the smoke clears enough for the ridge to truly appear. A twisted wall of coral boulders, jagged cliffs, and desolate crevices rising behind the airfield. The Umurbrogol Mountains. Bloody Nose Ridge. A place that looks less like Earth than something torn out of nightmare. The radio crackles. Prepare to land. The landing craft bucks wildly as it hits the reef. Marines surge forward, clutching rifles, packs, radios, flamethrowers. The bow ramp slams down with a deafening crash. Instantly, everything erupts. Japanese artillery hidden in the hills opens fire, the rounds howling over the lagoon and smashing into the transports offshore. Mortar bursts create fountains of white spray around the landing craft. Machine guns rake the waterline from firing ports invisible among the coral. The Marines sprint, dive, crawl, anything to get to cover. Horvath hits the beach and feels the heat of shrapnel whistle past his neck. Sand and coral shards blast upward as he drags a wounded corporal behind a tank trap. The man's breath is ragged, his chest soaked red. Horvath doesn't stop, he can't stop. The Marines push inland inch by agonizing inch. The airfield lies ahead, flat and dusty, scarred by shelling. But behind it, looming like the teeth of some prehistoric creature, waits the ridge they have yet to understand. By evening, Horvath kneels in a shallow scrape of ground, helmet dented, uniform torn, his face smeared with dust and blood. But they made progress. The airfield is within reach. Command believes the Japanese defense is collapsing. But as the sun sinks behind the ridge, Horvath stares at the dark silhouette above him. Something feels wrong. He cannot shake the feeling that the ridgeline is watching them back. Not broken, not defeated. Waiting. Peleliu is not done. Not even close. Section 2. First steps into the coral maze. September 18, 1944. Western edge of the Umurbrogol Mountains. 3 days after the landing, the airfield is all but secured. The cost has been horrific: burning tanks, shattered trees, and bodies strewn along the runway like discarded shadows. But the Marines, hardened by Cape Gloucester and trained for island combat, believe the worst is behind them. They are wrong. Horvath's platoon marches toward the first coral ridges, the sun a merciless hammer overhead. The heat radiates off the ground in shimmering waves. Canteens run dry within minutes. Even the lizards hide from the inferno. The ridge looms above them, jagged and white, riddled with crevices that disappear into darkness. The Japanese have been strangely quiet all morning. Too quiet. Horvath signals for his men to advance. A flamethrower team moves forward toward what appears to be an abandoned pillbox. But before they close the distance, a single rifle shot cracks from somewhere above, sharp, precise, cold. The flamethrower operator collapses, the pressure tank hissing out gasoline into the dirt. His assistant dives behind a boulder, eyes wide. Then the ridge comes alive. Machine guns stitched into the cliff walls open fire from holes so small they look like imperfections in the stone. Mortar rounds arc overhead and burst among the Marines with blistering shockwaves. Snipers hidden in the shadows pick off men who hesitate even a second too long. The world becomes a storm of dust, explosions, and ricochets ringing like angry hornets. Horvath drags his platoon behind a coral outcropping. They are pinned, absolutely pinned. Every time a Marine lifts his helmet above cover, a spray of bullets forces him back down. "What the hell?" a sergeant hisses. "We shelled this place for days. How are they still shooting?" Horvath doesn't answer. He's staring at the ridge again, really staring this time. There are no trenches, no bunkers in the traditional sense, no shattered enemy bodies on the slopes. Instead, the fire is coming from angles impossible to trace. The Japanese aren't dug into the ridge. They're dug inside it. As the morning drags on, the Marines make a sickening discovery. Every time they neutralize a firing position with grenades or flamethrowers, new fire erupts from somewhere else. Behind them, above them, even to their flanks. It feels like enemies are materializing out of stone. By noon, Horvath's company finally takes a small crest after hours of brutal crawling combat. The men slump down among the blasted coral, desperate for water. Some light cigarettes with shaking hands. Then a distant rumble begins beneath the ground. It grows louder, closer. Before anyone can react, a concealed steel hatch disguised as coral bursts open just 20 yards behind them. 6 Japanese soldiers rise out of the earth firing rifles and tossing grenades. Marines scramble for cover, cursing, firing wildly. The ridge erupts into chaos once again. It is then, amid the smoke and shock, that Horvath realizes something horrifying. The ridge isn't a fortress on top of the ground. It's a fortress under the ground. A living, breathing labyrinth. And the Marines have walked straight into its jaws. Section 3. The fortress reveals itself. September 20th, 1944. Deep within the Umurbrogol. By the 5th day, the Marines understand the truth. And the truth is worse than anyone expected. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa has turned the Umurbrogol Mountains into a subterranean citadel. Thousands of yards of tunnels twist beneath the coral surface, connecting hidden firing ports, sniper cavities, command rooms, and ammunition stores carved out of the white stone. Some chambers are reinforced with steel beams salvaged from naval wrecks. Others serve as medical bays, lit by dim lanterns where wounded defenders recover to fight again. Ventilation shafts snake upward to release smoke and heat without revealing positions. Water storage tanks allow men to survive weeks without resupply. Even worse, the fortress is immune to bombardment. Shells that would flatten concrete shatter harmlessly against solid coral. Horvath's battalion advances only feet at a time. Men fight for hours to take a single cave entrance, only for Japanese troops to reappear behind them via another unseen tunnel and retake the same ground. Positions gained at terrible cost are lost before nightfall. The ridge seems to regenerate its defenders like a wounded animal refusing to die. Flamethrower tanks sputter empty under the intense demand. Engineers burn through satchel charges faster than supply ships can deliver them. Water shortages cripple stamina. Heatstroke becomes nearly as lethal as bullets. The Japanese tactics shift constantly. At dawn, snipers fire from tiny slits higher than any Marine can climb. At midday, grenadiers pop from hidden holes, launch a single devastating volley, then vanish. At night, entire squads use tunnel exits to infiltrate Marine lines, slit throats, steal ammunition, and melt back into the darkness below. Horvath finds himself fighting shadows more than soldiers. Late one afternoon, his platoon watches a Japanese machine gunner fall from a cliff, riddled with bullets. But when they climb to secure the position, they find no weapon, no ammunition, no sign of how he got there. The firing port is just a black hole barely large enough for a hand. "What is this place?" someone whispers. A private answers in a trembling voice. "Hell." But hell is organized. Hell is strategic. Nakagawa's fortress is something else entirely. Hell with blueprints. Section 4. The Ridge That Eats Men Alive. September 25, 1944. Northern face of Bloody Nose Ridge. The Marines push deeper into the heart of the ridges. But the deeper they go, the more the landscape changes into something grotesque and alien. Coral spires jut out like skeletal fingers. Ravines twist into dead ends where snipers wait silently. The very ground seems forged to kill. Horvath's company joins a coordinated assault on the ridge's highest point. Mortars thump behind them. Corsair fighters scream overhead, dropping bombs that shake the earth. And yet, when the dust clears, machine gun fire still rips across the slopes. The Japanese simply duck into caves during bombardment, then emerge the moment bombs stop. The Marines advance anyway. They have to. Movement is slow, agonizing. Every boulder could hide a firing port. Every shadow could be a tunnel entrance. A sergeant crouches to inspect what looks like a discarded helmet, and an unseen sniper shoots him cleanly through the jaw. A flamethrower operator burns out a cave mouth, sending an inferno roaring into the darkness. Screams echo briefly from within. But minutes later, grenades arc out of a tunnel farther down the slope. It is like fighting the entire mountain. Hour by hour, casualties mount. Officers fall wounded or dead at an alarming rate. Runners scramble through gunfire to relay orders after radios are destroyed by heat and shrapnel. Yet despite the chaos, Horvath's men reach a crest just before sundown. It is a small victory, a few yards of ground purchased with gallons of blood. As the light fades, Marines dig in. The heat gives way to cold wind blowing through coral cracks. Exhaustion pushes men into uneasy sleep, until the tunnels open again. At 2 a.m., a Japanese squad bursts from a concealed hatch behind Marine lines. Knives flash in the moonlight. Sentinels fall silently. Machine gun teams are ambushed as their weapons are seized and turned against them. Panic spreads. Horvath awakens to chaos. The sound of shouting, the crack of rifles at impossible angles. This is no ordinary infiltration. This is deliberate psychological warfare. As dawn breaks, the Marines discover something chilling. The Japanese have reoccupied positions the Marines captured the day before. The ridge has erased the progress of 24 hours, as if swallowing it whole. And the realization settles in with crushing weight. If the Marines want to take Bloody Nose Ridge, they must kill an entire fortress one room at a time. Section 5. Breaking Through the Living Mountain. October 1st, 1944. Central Umurbrogol. The battle enters its cruelest stage. Supplies dwindle. Fresh water becomes more precious than ammunition. Marines ration sips from canteens, their lips cracking, their tongues dry as bone. Horvath watches as flamethrower teams rig improvised fuel tanks because resupply cannot keep pace with the number of caves they must destroy. Engineers work with trembling hands to stack satchel charges around cave mouths. Each blast sends debris thundering down the slopes, but still the fortress fights on. Nakagawa's men use every tactic imaginable. Some charge in suicidal bursts. Others wait patiently, firing only a single bullet an hour to keep Marines guessing. Voices echo from deep within the tunnels. Sometimes taunts, sometimes eerie singing, sometimes nothing but coughing and the clang of steel tools. Inside one captured cave, Marines find abandoned cooking pots still warm. The defenders had been there minutes earlier and vanished into the earth like ghosts. When Horvath crawls through a fissure leading to a small chamber, he discovers a tunnel descending at a sharp angle. The passage is barely wide enough for a man. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, smoke, and earth. He shines his flashlight downward, and sees something that chills him. Boot prints. Hundreds of them, going in every direction. This is not a simple defensive network. This is a city beneath the mountain. But the Marines refuse to yield. They develop gruesome, efficient methods to clear the fortress. Flamethrowers first. Demolition charges next. Bulldozers push rubble over cave mouths. Napalm drips into cracks and ignites with terrifying force. One ridge at a time, one cave at a time, they begin to compress the labyrinth. Horvath feels the shift. The Japanese are still relentless, but no longer everywhere. Their fire slackens. The tunnel entrances thin out. The fortress is bleeding. Nakagawa knows it. The Marines know it. But the fight is not finished. Not until every chamber is silent. Not until the last soldier in the mountain gives up his final breath. Section 6. The fortress dies hard. November 1944. The final days. After nearly 2 months, what remains of the Japanese garrison withdraws into the deepest chambers of the Umurbrogol. The fortress that once seemed invincible is now a tomb. Horvath enters the last captured ridge crest on November 23rd. Smoke curls from cracks. The air smells of charred coral. Tunnels collapse under the weight of explosives detonated below. Engineers mark off chambers filled with rubble where no sound emerges. But in a handful of caves, voices still echo. The final defenders refuse to surrender. Some fire their last rounds. Others detonate grenades as Marines approach. A few scream curses into the darkness, defiant until the end. When the last explosion fades, the ridge falls quiet. Utterly quiet. The fortress, once alive with fire and movement, is finally dead. Horvath stands atop Bloody Nose Ridge as the sun sets. The coral glows orange. The wind whistles through cracks where once machine guns spat fire. Below him stretches Peleliu, scarred, broken, haunted. The cost is beyond imagining. The 1st Marine Division is shattered. Entire companies reduced to handfuls of men. Nearly 2 months of fighting for a ridge that should have taken a day. Horvath closes his eyes. The ground beneath him feels still. But he will never forget that for weeks. The ridge had been breathing. Section 7. What the Marines found beneath their boots. November 24th, 1944. Bloody Nose Ridge. Dawn creeps over Peleliu in muted shades of orange, casting long shadows across the shattered coral. The firing has mostly stopped, yet the island feels tense, like an animal that has been wounded but not fully killed. Lieutenant Horvath moves carefully across the crest with a small reconnaissance team. Their orders are simple. Descend into the newly opened tunnels and identify any remaining threats. But nothing about this place is simple anymore. The entrance yawns like the mouth of a dead beast. A jagged split of coral widened by flamethrowers, satchel charges, and raw determination. The air that drifts out is cold, damp, laced with soot and decay. Horvath adjusts the strap of his Thompson, takes a breath, and steps inside. The darkness swallows them instantly. Flashlights flicker on, weak cones of light cutting through swirling dust. The tunnel slopes downward at a sharp angle. The coral walls have been hacked and carved with meticulous detail. Smooth in some passages, jagged in others where last-minute digging must have taken place. Overhead, beams of salvaged ship steel reinforce the ceiling. Some are stamped with Japanese naval markings. Others are rusted beyond recognition. A corporal behind him mutters, "Looks like they built this for 1,000 men." Horvath knows the truth. They nearly did. They move deeper. The temperature drops further. It feels like descending into the bones of the earth. Every step echoes with haunting clarity. Sometimes distant drips of water punctuate the silence. Other times, Horvath swears he hears movement, faint and ghostly, as if the fortress resents their intrusion. Then they reach the first chamber. It is a medical bay. Lanterns hang dead from hooks in the wall. A table carved from coral is stained with dark patches, blood dried long ago. Surgical tools lie scattered across the floor. A half-finished ration tin rests beside a straw mat where a wounded soldier had once lain. The ashes of a small fire sit in the corner, still warm. "They pulled out fast," whispers the corporal. No one responds. They push forward through a low passage that forces them to crawl. The tunnel twists, rises, then descends again. They pass a storage chamber filled with boxes of ammunition, hundreds of rounds untouched, dozens of grenades still crated, enough firepower to defend the ridge for weeks more. Further in, they reach what looks like a command post, a desk carved from coral, maps neatly pinned to the wall, charcoal markings showing firing angles, kill zones, fallback routes. A rough outline of the ridge with dozens of numbered chambers branching into every direction like veins. The scale of it is unreal. Horvath steps closer. Pinned at the center of the map is a single note in Japanese kanji. A Marine who speaks some of the language translates in a low voice, "If we cannot hold the surface, the mountain will hold itself." A shiver crawls down Horvath's spine. This was never meant to be a simple defense. It was a philosophy, a final testament. They continue deeper. As they descend into what must be one of the lowest chambers, the air grows thick with smoke and heat. They find several bodies, some slumped near firing positions, others with grenades still clutched in their hands. The defenders had chosen death rather than surrender. Their uniforms are charred. Their rifles lie beside them, bolts locked back, magazines empty. Among them is a man with officer insignia, likely a company commander. His final posture is rigid, almost formal, as though awaiting inspection. Horvath pauses before him, offering a silent moment of respect. There is no triumph here, only the heavy understanding of shared human cost. One Marine whispers, "What kind of men fight like this?" Horvath answers softly, "Men who believe this mountain is their duty." They press on. At last they emerge into a vast chamber nearly 30 feet across, the largest yet. The ceiling rises into natural vaults. Blackened soot marks the stone from months of cooking fires. A water barrel stands in one corner. Crates of dried fish and rice stand stacked in neat rows. For a moment, the Marines feel as though they've stepped into an underground village rather than a bunker. Then they see the tunnel that continues even deeper. A narrow shaft descending into blackness so profound it seems to lead straight into the earth's heart. Horvath crouches, shining his flashlight downward. The beam disappears into nothing. A sickening realization settles over him. They never destroyed the entire fortress. They couldn't, because the fortress never truly ended. It simply burrowed deeper than any of them imagined. "Lieutenant," the corporal says, voice uneasy, "should we go down?" Horvath stares into the void, listening to the faint, hollow echo drifting up from below. It feels like the mountain exhaling its final breath. "No," he whispers. "We seal it." Before they leave, Horvath takes one last look at the chamber. The maps, the supplies, the empty mats. A subterranean world built on desperation, discipline, and unyielding will. A world few Marines had understood until it was too late. When they climb back into the daylight, he feels the sun like a shock to the senses. Bloody Nose Ridge is silent now. But beneath the surface, the mountain remembers everything. Section 8. The Ridge That Refused to Die. November 25, 1944. Eastern escarpment of Bloody Nose Ridge. The morning sun feels unnaturally bright after the darkness of the tunnels. Lieutenant Horvath squints against the glare as he walks along the ridge's eastern face, now pitted with the scars of flamethrowers, explosives, and weeks of unrelenting combat. The silence is disturbing, far too complete for a place that consumed so many lives. Yet even as he moves along the shattered coral, he senses the ridge is not done with them. Word spreads quickly through the battalion. Engineers have begun sealing entrances, detonating charges to collapse tunnels, bulldozing rubble into gaping voids. Some of the entrances erupt in great plumes of dust when explosives detonate. Others give way slowly, groaning as the weight of the mountain shifts. Still others, frighteningly, refuse to collapse at all. A message arrives from a neighboring company. Movement detected inside sealed tunnels. Faint scratching. Echoes. Something they cannot identify. Horvath joins a team sent to investigate. They gather outside a sealed cave mouth reinforced by coral boulders. The men stand still, holding their breath. First, there is nothing. Only the whisper of wind through broken foliage. Then it comes again. A faint tapping deep beneath their feet. Rhythmic. Deliberate. A corporal bites his lip. Sir. They're still alive down there. Horvath's jaw tightens. He knows it's true. The labyrinth carved beneath them is too vast to fully map. Too deep to fully destroy. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of men could still be hiding in chambers untouched by flamethrowers or explosives. Men willing to cling to their duty until starvation or suffocation takes them. What do we do? Another Marine asks. Horvath looks at the sealed cave. He hears the tapping again. Softer now, but unmistakable. We mark it, he says quietly. And we move on. Feels wrong. Feels cruel. But they have no choice. The fight here has already cost too many lives. Searching every tunnel to its deepest end would take months. And more men than they can afford to lose. The Japanese defenders built this fortress not only as a defense, but as a grave they were willing to occupy. They move on. Later in the afternoon, the Marines push toward a narrow ravine where a series of hidden firing ports had caused enormous casualties in the early days of the assault. Engineers report one opening too reinforced to destroy with standard charges. Horvath volunteers to inspect it himself. The port is small, no larger than a helmet. Coral around it is blackened from flamethrowers. The interior is pitch black, the smell of burnt rubber and cordite drifting faintly out. He leans in carefully. His flashlight beam finds something unexpected. A wooden plaque, scorched at the edges, hangs just inside the chamber. The kanji is written with elegant strokes. Even in the midst of hell. A Marine translator steps beside him and reads in a solemn voice. For the Emperor. For Peleliu. For eternity. Horvath steps back from the opening. The weight of those words settles onto him like a suffocating blanket. The Japanese defenders had not merely fought. They had consecrated this ground with their will to die in it. As the day wears on, more grim discoveries emerge. In one cave, Marines find ladders descending into shafts too deep to measure. In another, they find tracks, rails hammered into the coral and used to move crates of ammunition along the incline. In one chamber, they find a small hand-drawn mural of soldiers marching toward a sunburst on the horizon. Nothing about the fortress feels improvised anymore. This was built with purpose, with engineering, with belief. Even as engineers detonate charges along the ridgeline, Horvath watches dust clouds rise from vents located hundreds of yards away, ventilation shafts that remain invisible from the surface until the explosions force their breath upward. This whole damn mountain is hollow, one Marine mutters. No, Horvath answers softly. It's alive. As evening settles, the ridge casts long shadows across the valley. Fires smolder where brush has burned away. The ground still trembles occasionally with delayed cave-ins. The air is thick with dust that glitters in the fading light like drifting ash. Horvath sits alone on a coral ledge overlooking the slopes they fought so hard to take. He removes his helmet, letting the cool air touch his sweat-soaked hair. For weeks he had believed they were fighting soldiers. But now he understands. They were fighting a philosophy carved into stone. A fortress built not to win, but to endure. A fortress that refuses to die even after the men inside it are gone. As night falls, distant tapping echoes again beneath the ground. Horvath closes his eyes. Bloody Nose Ridge still has a heartbeat. Section 9. Echoes in the Deep. November 27, 1944. Western approach to the horseshoe. For 2 days now, the ridge has remained mostly silent. Yet the silence itself has become unnerving. The Marines walking its slopes feel as though they are trespassing through the ribs of some ancient creature that has finally collapsed, yet whose spirit still watches from beneath the stone. Lieutenant Horvath leads another detail toward the horseshoe, a curved section of coral bluff where Japanese defenders once held overlapping fields of fire that tore through the 1st Regiment during their desperate early assaults. The terrain is chaotic. Jagged coral towers, deep crevices, slots barely wide enough for a man to slip through sideways. The landscape feels as though it has been fractured by an earthquake and rearranged by the whim of a cruel god. As they move through the shadows, Horvath keeps glancing down, half expecting the ground to crumble open beneath him and reveal another tunnel mouth. It's not paranoia, it's lived reality. The first sign comes when Private Malloy stops suddenly, raising a fist for silence. Horvath halts the line. At first, they hear nothing but wind brushing through broken brush. Then soft, faint, unmistakable. They hear voices. Japanese voices. The words are indecipherable, distant as if echoing from another world. The men slowly walk toward the sound until they reach a crevice wedged between two coral bulges. The voices grow clearer for a moment, then stop entirely. The crevice leads nowhere, just a slit in the rock. But beneath it, the earth seems hollow. Malloy whispers, "Sir, should we?" Horvath shakes his head. "Mark it. Keep moving." The mystery gnaws at them as they continue. By midday, engineers have joined the party, hauling charges to collapse additional cave networks reported by patrols. The first explosion reverberates through the ridge like a thunderclap. Dust erupts from cracks dozens of yards away. The entire mountain groans, unsettled by the disturbance. Coral fragments rain from above. But it's what happens after the second explosion that chills every man who hears it. A slow, muffled roar rises from deep below, long and terrible, like air rushing through a massive hollow space. Then comes a sound none of them expect. A single rifle shot, then another, then three more. Faint but deliberate. Horvath exchanges a glance with the engineer sergeant. "They're still firing," the sergeant mutters. "Jesus! After all this time?" Horvath swallows hard. "They're signaling, or warning." The Japanese are entombed but not silent. Later that afternoon, they find another entrance partially obscured by blasted coral. Inside, the tunnel slopes upward in a narrow S-curve. Soot smears the ceiling from lantern smoke. When Horvath pushes forward, he encounters a collapsed section where the roof has caved in. Dust still drifts from the rubble, and beneath the rubble, he hears it again. Movement, scratching, a faint cough, a living man. Horvath kneels, placing his palm to the stone. The sound stops instantly, as if whoever is trapped beyond the collapse is listening back. For a moment, neither side moves, neither breathes. Then comes a soft tapping. Not hostile, not frantic, just present. Horvath closes his eyes. These men are living ghosts now. Their war is over, but their bodies haven't accepted it. "Sir," Malloy asks softly. "Orders." Horvath rises. His voice is steady. "Mark it. Move out." There is no malice in his tone, only sorrow. As they climb back toward the surface, the daylight feels heavy and almost unreal. Smoke still rises from some collapsed cave systems where engineers burned brush to expose additional openings. The Marines work tirelessly, but the ridge fights back in subtle ways. Shifting stone, hidden chambers, collapsing floors, unpredictable echoes that make communication nearly impossible. At sunset, the battalion regroups near the ridge's northern crest. Cooks distribute what rations they can. Men sit in small groups, their voices hushed. The day's discoveries weigh on them more than any firefight. Horvath sits apart from the others, polishing dust from his weapon, though he knows it will be coated again by morning. His eyes drift toward the ridgeline silhouetted against the fading sky. A thought rises unbidden. How do you conquer a battlefield that refuses to stop fighting? Because Bloody Nose Ridge is not dead. Not truly. It breathes through cracks. It whispers through stone. It remembers every step, every life, every moment of agony carved into its bones. Horvath finally stands and makes his way to the edge of the escarpment. The valley below glows with faint campfires. The distant sea rolls calmly against the reef. For the first time, the island seems peaceful. Yet behind him, deep in the mountain, a faint tapping begins again. Not frantic, not aggressive, just steady, patient, as though the fortress is not surrendering, merely waiting. Horvath turns away, the hair raising on the back of his neck. The battle for the ridge may be over, but the ridge itself has never stopped fighting. Section 10, The Last Chambers. November 30th, 1944. Southeast spur of the Umurbrogol. The final days of the operation settle over Peleliu like a heavy mist, quiet, still, yet thick with unease. The island's dense heat persists, but the gunfire that once cracked across the ridges now comes only in isolated bursts. Most Marines take this as a sign of nearing completion. Lieutenant Horvath knows better. He has learned that silence on this island is rarely honest. This morning, he leads a small detail toward the southeast spur, where reconnaissance flights have identified several dark cavities in the escarpment. Engineers have attempted charges here, but something, stone density, tunnel construction, intentional reinforcement, has prevented clean collapses. Headquarters needs confirmation. The battalion needs closure. Horvath steps carefully along the jagged path, boots crunching across coral fragments like brittle bone. The ridge falls away in sharp ledges on either side. Below, the forest is a tangle of brown and gray, stripped of life by weeks of bombardment. The air is so dry it stings the throat. When they reach the first cavity, Horvath crouches, inspecting the opening. Black soot rings the lip. A flamethrower team has already introduced fire here. The interior smells of smoke and something far older, damp earth and time. Flashlights, he orders. The beams pierce the initial darkness but reveal only a narrow crawl space before bending sharply to the right. The coral walls are smooth, too smooth. Horvath has grown familiar with the Japanese method of carving passageways. They sculpted with precision, each stroke deliberate, each angle designed to channel airflow, conceal occupants, or prepare kill zones. This entrance is no different. Horvath gestures to Private Malloy. "You're with me." They crawl forward, moving slowly, methodically. The passage feels alive, pulsing with the faint echo of their movements, responding in subtle reverberations. When they round the corner, the space widens into a small chamber big enough for 6 men. The floor is covered in ash, charred remains of bedding, metal canteens flattened by heat. A makeshift altar with a small wooden amulet sits undisturbed. Malloy whispers, "Looks like they cooked in here." Horvath nods, examining the blackened ceiling. Lived here, too. To think. Men hid in these rooms while Marines fought mere feet above, both unaware of how close they were at times. The thought sends a shiver across his spine. They move into a connected tunnel that slopes steeply downward. The incline is treacherous. Horvath grips the coral wall to steady himself. Far below, the tunnel disappears into shadow. Before committing further, he listens. Nothing. No voices. No tapping. No air movement. He starts to turn back when something faint catches his ear. A single breath. Barely perceptible. Human. He signals Malloy to freeze. Both men hold still until the sound comes again. A rasping exhale like lungs pulling the last threads of oxygen from stale air. Horvath edges down the slope, flashlight aimed ahead. The beam finally lands on a figure slumped against the wall. A Japanese soldier. Alive. Barely. His uniform hangs in tatters. His lips are cracked. His rifle lies beside him, bolt open, empty. His eyes flutter open when the light hits him, but he doesn't reach for the weapon. He simply stares, exhausted, resigned, yet not afraid. Horvath kneels cautiously. The soldier lifts a trembling hand, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. A gesture of recognition between 2 men trapped by a war neither fully controls. Malloy swallows. "Should we?" Horvath studies the man's face. He sees no hatred there, only the quiet dignity of someone who has accepted his fate. Get the corpsman. When the corpsman arrives minutes later, he assesses the soldier with clinical speed, then shakes his head. He won't last an hour. Horvath stays beside him anyway. The soldier whispers a few words in Japanese. Faint, breathless. A translator later would tell Horvath what they meant. "The mountain watches." Those are his final words. His chest rises once more, then stills. The Marines carry his body out carefully, gently, as if he were one of their own fallen. Even Malloy, who has lost friends to snipers and grenade ambushes, helps without hesitation. Outside, daylight feels strange, too bright, too normal. Horvath blinks against the sun, feeling a heaviness settle in his chest. This man was not a monster, nor a fanatic devoid of thought. He was a soldier following a duty carved deep into him, just as Horvath follows his. The underground fortress may have been engineered for war, but it was sustained by the will of men who believed their lives were already offered to the stone. Engineers set charges inside the chamber. Horvath watches as they prepare fuses, pack satchel charges, and retreat to a safe distance. When the explosion detonates, the ground trembles. Dust boils out of the entrance. A deep groan ripples through the ridge as another artery of the fortress collapses. Another piece of the mountain dies. But not quietly, never quietly. As the echoes fade, Horvath senses something in the ground beneath his boots. A faint vibration, as if the collapsing chamber has awakened other hollow spaces far below, shifting with the weight of history and conflict. Malloy approaches. "Sir, when do you think this place will finally be done?" Horvath doesn't answer at first. His gaze travels across the jagged ridge, where so many hidden chambers still lurk beneath layers of coral and dust. At last he says, "When it wants to be, because this ridge has never yielded through force alone. It yields only through exhaustion, its own and theirs." As they prepare to move on, the wind whistles through broken coral outcroppings. For a moment, the sound resembles distant voices, soft, echoing, lingering. Not ghosts, not spirits, just the memory of men who chose to become part of the mountain. Section 11. The Silence That Wasn't Silence. December 3rd, 1944. Southern spur of the Umurbrogol Mountains. The first days of December settle over Peleliu with an eerie finality. The battle is officially over in every operational report, yet no Marine walking the ridges believes that statement fully. Lieutenant Horvath moves across the southern spur with a small reconnaissance detail assigned to verify that no tunnel mouths, vents, or supply caches remain unaccounted for. It is routine work on paper, but nothing about the Umurbrogol ever feels routine. The air is heavy, still. Even the wind seems hesitant to cross these jagged formations of coral. Horvath steps carefully over shattered rock, now bleached white by sun and salt. The scars of battle, blast marks, charred brush, bullet-pocked stone, stretch in every direction. Yet beneath the devastation lies something else. Correction, here's something else. A noise, soft, unexpected, almost like breathing. He pauses. His men halt behind him, exchanging uncertain glances. A corporal whispers, "Sir, you hear that?" Horvath raises a hand, signaling silence. The sound continues, faint, rhythmic, as though distant waves echoing inside the earth. But they are too far from the shore for that. The sound seems to rise directly from the stone beneath their boots. A memory flickers in Horvath's mind. The dying Japanese soldier whispering, "The mountain watches." He kneels, touching the ground. For a moment he feels nothing. Then a tremor, barely more than a vibration, but real. Could be earth settling after recent cave collapses. It could be trapped pockets of air shifting under pressure. It could be anything in a landscape that has been torn open, burned, and scarred by months of war. But the Marines look at him expectantly, waiting for an explanation he cannot give. "Keep moving," he finally says. They proceed toward a narrow ravine where reconnaissance teams reported traces of smoke a day earlier, too faint to confirm, but too strange to ignore. The ravine itself is a crooked scar carved into the ridge, a dark wound running between two jagged walls. As they descend, Horvath notices something unsettling. The vegetation here hasn't been burned. It has grown back faster than anywhere else on the island, forming pockets of shadow beneath the rocks. Halfway down the ravine, they find it. A vent, small, roughly carved, breathing warm air. The corporal recoils. "Sir, that means someone." "I know." Horvath crouches beside the opening. The warmth of the air tells him one thing clearly. Whatever chamber connects to this shaft hasn't been cold for long. A fire, however small, must have burned inside recently. Enough to generate heat, enough to require ventilation. But how? They sealed every major chamber, collapsed most tunnels, exploded every large pocket suspected of harboring defenders. He runs his fingers over the edge of the vent. Fresh soot rubs onto his glove. Someone was alive down there. Maybe still is. Malloy breaks the silence. Do we open it? Horvath studies the tiny vent. It is barely wide enough for a wrist. No marine could fit through it. Yet beneath it, an entire cavern system could still exist, untouched, unmapped, undestroyed. If survivors remain in those depths, they are living in a tomb of darkness, sealed by their own command's determination to fight to the last breath. Men resigned to silence. Men who would rather fade unseen into the earth than surrender. Horvath speaks quietly. No, we mark it. Engineers will deal with it. But inside he is conflicted. The battle is over. Yet this ridge refuses to release its dead or its living. As they retreat up the ravine, the vent exhales one final breath of warm air. It brushes Horvath's neck like a whisper, stopping him mid-stride. He turns. The vent is still, silent, but for a heartbeat, he is certain he heard something rising from below. A voice, a single syllable, carried on a breath of dying heat. He cannot be sure. He does not investigate further. Instead, he rejoins his men and leads them out of the ravine, away from the lingering echo of a fortress that refuses to die completely. Because even in victory, the Marines of Peleliu are forced to confront one final truth. Some battles end only on the surface. The rest continue in the dark. Horvath does not look back again. Section 12. The Weight That Followed Them Home. January 1945. Pavuvu Island, rear area of the 1st Marine Division. Rain drifts over the island in long, gentle curtains, a soothing contrast to the scorched coral nightmare Horvath left behind on Peleliu. Pavuvu is quiet, humid, and green. Too green. The lush hills and palm-fringed shores feel unreal after months spent fighting inside limestone ridges that seemed carved by fire and death itself. Lieutenant Richard Horvath sits alone beneath a sagging tent awning, staring at a small tin mug half-filled with cold coffee. Around him, Marines come and go, some limping, some bandaged, others hollow-eyed. Men who once laughed at campfire jokes now speak only when duty demands it. Pavuvu was meant to be a rest area, but the word rest feels like a cruel joke. Bloody Nose Ridge followed them here. It followed them in nightmares, in sudden jolts awake at night, in the way certain sounds, the crack of a dropped board, the snap of a palm branch, make hands twitch toward phantom rifles. Every man who fought in the Umurbrogol carries the weight of something unfinished, something that refused to die even when the ridge itself fell silent. Malloy approaches quietly, dropping onto a crate beside him. Mail call came in, he mutters, holding out a folded letter. From the division chaplain. Horvath nods but doesn't open it. He already knows the contents. Another list of names. Men confirmed dead. Men still unaccounted for. Men believed to have been buried inside sealed chambers when engineers collapsed the last suspected tunnel complexes. Malloy watches him. You think there's anyone still alive in there? Horvath exhales slowly. I think there were voices in those tunnels longer than any of us expected. Malloy looks down at his boots. Do you ever feel like we left something behind? Something unfinished? Horvath doesn't answer immediately. He remembers the warmth of the vent, the final breath of heat, the faint murmur, imagined or real, that traveled up from the sealed dark. He remembers the final whisper of the dying officer. The mountain watches. He folds the letter, untouched. Yes, he finally says. Every day. A sudden outburst rises from a nearby tent. Shouts. A crash of metal. Two Marines restrain a third who thrashes in panic, eyes wild. Another nightmare. Another man dragged back into combat by memories that refuse to fade. Pavuvu is filled with scenes like this. Men shaved clean, wearing fresh uniforms, yet unable to escape the underground fortress that carved itself into their minds. After a moment, calm returns. The rain intensifies, pattering softly onto canvas roofs. Horvath watches the droplets race down the awning's edge. One drop splits into two, then merges again at the bottom. He murmurs, "It's strange." Malloy glances at him. "What is? This island is so green, so alive. And yet, I still hear the coral cracking, still smell the smoke." Malloy swallows. "I still see their eyes in the tunnels." Horvath nods. Later that afternoon, the battalion assembles for a debrief. The commanding officer stands before them, recounting casualty numbers, commendations, and plans for future deployments. His voice is steady, authoritative, but every Marine in the formation stands rigid, many gripping their hands behind their backs to stop the tremors. When the briefing ends, Horvath remains behind as others leave. He approaches the CO quietly. "Sir," he says, "permission to speak freely." The CO studies him for a moment. His own eyes are tired, older than they should be. "Granted." Horvath hesitates. "Sir, I believe there are still chambers on Peleliu we never reached, caverns deeper than our maps, and I believe some defenders may still be alive down there." The CO doesn't react at first. Then he places a hand on Horvath's shoulder. "Lieutenant, the war moves forward. We can't go back for shadows." Horvath lowers his eyes. He knows the CO is right, yet the truth weighs on him. Shadows do not terrify him. Living echoes do. That night, in his tent, Horvath lies awake listening to the rain. For a moment, he imagines the droplets striking coral instead of canvas. Imagines the cold dark of the tunnels rising to meet him. Imagines the faint tapping of men refusing to die quietly. He opens his eyes. The tent is dark. Pavuvu is peaceful. But somewhere deep inside him, Bloody Nose Ridge still breathes. And Horvath knows something he cannot say aloud. Some battles end. Others become part of you. He turns onto his side, closing his eyes, hoping sleep will come before the ridge returns in his dreams. Section 13. The Island That Wouldn't Let Go. March 1945. Pavuvu, then onward to Okinawa staging orders. 2 months pass, but Peleliu refuses to fade from Horvath's bloodstream. Even as the division prepares for its next nightmare, Okinawa, he feels the weight of an unfinished chapter pressing against the back of his mind. The other officers sense it too. They move through camp with restless energy, knowing the war demands another sacrifice soon. But none speak openly about the thing they all carry. One evening, as Horvath walks the perimeter road circling the camp, a distant rumble of thunder rolls over Pavuvu's dark canopy. The tropical night is alive with insects and wind, but to Horvath's ears, the sounds blend into something else. Distant explosions, cracking coral, muffled shouts. He stops. The sound fades. The jungle returns. But the moment leaves his heart pounding harder than it should. "Hey, Lieutenant." He turns. Chaplain Morris approaches, hands tucked behind his back, expression calm, almost knowing. "Evening, Father," Horvath says softly. The chaplain studies him. "You've been walking this trail for an hour." Horvath glances away. "Just getting air." Morris doesn't force the issue. Instead, he walks beside him in gentle silence until they reach a hill overlooking the lagoon. Moonlight glitters on the wind-carved water. For a moment, it looks almost like shattered coral under torchlight. "You know," Morris begins quietly, "men don't return from certain battles the same way they left." Horvath's jaw tightens. Peleliu wasn't a battle. It was something else. The chaplain nods. "I've heard what the men say about the tunnels, the voices, the feeling that the ridge wasn't just terrain." "It wasn't." Horvath's voice cracks sharper than expected. Morris waits. Horvath inhales deeply. "We sealed chambers that still had air moving through them. Warm air. Some of my men swore they heard tapping. Some heard whispering." He pauses. "I did too." Morris considers this. "You believe someone was still alive down there?" "I don't know what I believe." Horvath rubs his temple. "I just know the mountain wasn't finished with us." The chaplain is silent for a long moment. Then he says, "War creates ghosts long before men die, Lieutenant. Horvath closes his eyes. The words are true. In the tunnels of Umurbrogol, shadows moved like living things. Some were men. Some he still isn't sure. A runner emerges from camp, searching the hillside. Lieutenant. Message from headquarters. Horvath meets him halfway. The message is short. Recon report. Smoke observed rising from Ridge Sector J-12. Unique signature. Possibly human. Horvath freezes. The runner continues. Sir, this came from a Navy reconnaissance flight. They said the smoke wasn't from brush. Looked like a cooking fire. Malloy arrives behind him, breathless. Sir, does that mean? Horvath's pulse quickens. He knows exactly which region J-12 refers to. A pocket of the southern Umurbrogol. An area they believed fully collapsed. An area where he once knelt beside a warm vent that exhaled like the last breath of something dying, and something surviving. The chaplain speaks softly. Lieutenant, there's nothing you can do. Peleliu isn't ours anymore. Horvath clenches the message. Maybe not, but men might still be down there. Alone. Starving. Morris nods sympathetically. Or perhaps the island is giving its last illusions. Trauma has a way of replaying itself. But Horvath knows this is not trauma. Not imagination. Not projection. He remembers the soldier who whispered, "The mountain watches." And in this moment, he can feel the mountain watching still. Later that night, as rain begins to fall again, Horvath sits at his desk and rewrites the reconnaissance report by hand, copying every word with trembling precision. He folds it carefully, slips it into his journal, and stares at the closed cover. Peleliu is an island thousands of miles behind him. But in his mind, the ridges remain lit by dim lanterns. The tunnels continue breathing. And somewhere in the dark, beneath tons of coral and silence, something is still alive. Not necessarily a soldier, not necessarily a ghost, but a memory with weight, presence with patience, a fortress that refuses to surrender even to time. Horvath sets down his pen and whispers into the storm outside. I know you're still there. And for a heartbeat, he swears the night answers in return. Section 14. Shadows on the next battlefield. April 1945. USS Auburn, approaching Okinawa. The sea is calm, deceptively gentle beneath the gray morning sky. A thin mist rolls across the water as the invasion fleet pushes northward. Hundreds of ships stretching across the horizon. A steel armada preparing for the largest amphibious operation of the Pacific War. Marines crowd the rails, staring toward the unknown. Some try to joke. Most remain silent. Lieutenant Richard Horvath stands alone on the starboard deck, hands tightened around the railing. He watches the waves slap rhythmically against the hull, each impact echoing faintly, like distant knocking inside coral walls. He closes his eyes. He tries to ignore it. He fails. Malloy approaches quietly. His voice is low, careful. You've been avoiding sleep again. Horvath doesn't respond. Malloy continues. I walked past your bunk last night. You were awake when I turned in. And awake again when I got up. A pause. You keep dreaming of it, don't you? The ridge. Horvath opens his eyes to the rolling sea. It's not dreams. Dreams fade. This doesn't. Malloy shifts uneasily. We're heading into hell again, sir. Okinawa's supposed to be worse than anything we've seen. Maybe it's not a good time to carry Peleliu on your back. Horvath lets out a humorless breath. If only it were that simple. A Marine nearby shouts as a flight of Navy corsairs roars overhead, banking low across the water. The sound is thunderous, but to Horvath's ears, the roar blends briefly with another noise. Deep, hollow, almost like the groan of a collapsing cavern. He tenses. Malloy notices. You okay? Horvath forces himself upright. I'm fine, but he isn't, because last night, for the first time, Peleliu followed him somewhere new. He had been drifting between wakefulness and exhausted half-sleep when the sound returned. Tapping, steady, coming from beneath the floorboards of the ship. For taps. Pause. 3 taps. A pattern he had heard once before, deep inside a collapsing tunnel system. He told himself it was the hull flexing. He told himself it was nothing. But part of him knew better. He opens his journal later that evening, flipping to the folded reconnaissance report describing smoke rising from Ridge Sector J-12. He traces the words with his thumb. The ink seems darker than he remembers, as though the message itself refuses to fade. Horvath closes the book sharply. The next morning, the ship's loudspeakers crackle. Prepare for landing operations. First assault waves beginning assembly. The air changes instantly, tightens, electrifies. Marines rush to gear inspection, ammo distribution, final briefings. Chaplains move through the crowds offering quick prayers. Officers bark orders over the roar of engines and the clatter of equipment. But to Horvath, the sounds merge into something else entirely. The echoing clang of steel hatches in a tunnel system, the bark of rifles in tight cavern mouths, the distant rhythm of warm air rising through coral vents. He closes his fists until his knuckles ache. Malloy grabs his arm. "Sir, focus. We need you here." Horvath snaps back, breathing hard. "I am here." But even as he says it, he knows it isn't entirely true. Some part of him never left the ridge. Some part of him is still kneeling beside that warm vent, feeling the breath of something trapped, but not defeated below. Hours later, as their landing craft crashes through heavy surf toward the beaches of Okinawa, Horvath crouches low, gripping his rifle. Mortar fire explodes in the distance. Smoke shrouds the coastline. Men tighten their helmets, steady their nerves. The coxswain yells over the engine, "30 seconds." Horvath inhales. But the air smells wrong. Not salt. Not diesel. Not fear. It smells of burning coral. He shuts his eyes tightly. No, this is Okinawa. Not Peleliu. Then a voice whispers behind him. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. The mountain watches. Horvath spins around. But behind him are only Marines, packed tight, tense and silent. None had spoken. Malloy's face drains of color. "Sir, did you hear that?" Horvath's heart hammers against his ribs. Before he can respond, the ramp crashes open. Bullets slash the water. Men surge forward into chaos. Horvath charges with them, but for the first time in the war, he feels something worse than fear. He feels the past stepping onto the beach beside him. Final section, the mountain that stayed. August 1945. Okinawa, then homebound Pacific waters. The war ends not with the crack of rifles or the collapse of a fortress, but with a radio transmission carried through humid air. Word spreads slowly across the battered ridgelines of Okinawa. Japan has surrendered. Some Marines stare blankly, unable to grasp the idea of a war that can stop. Others laugh or cry, and some simply sit down where they stand, overwhelmed by exhaustion deeper than bone. Lieutenant Richard Horvath hears the news aboard a transport ship preparing to leave the Ryukyus. The men cheer around him, some hugging, others pounding fists against bulkheads in disbelief. But Horvath remains still, hands clasped loosely, gaze lost somewhere beyond the steel deck and the horizon. Malloy drops onto the crate beside him, grinning through bandages and bruises. "It's over, sir. Really over." Horvath forces a nod. "Yeah, over." But his mind isn't on Okinawa. It isn't on home. It isn't on the future at all. It's back on Peleliu. Weeks later, as the ship cuts eastward across the Pacific, men write letters home, play cards, carve names into crates. Rituals of returning to a world they fear might not recognize them. Horvath spends his nights on the weather deck, staring at moonlit waves. The tapping hasn't returned. The whispers have faded. The presence that shadowed him through Okinawa is quiet now, yet the silence feels loaded. One night, while the ship glides through a glasscalm sea, Malloy joins him at the rail. "You're thinking about it again," Malloy says gently. Horvath doesn't deny it. "Tell me something, Corporal. When you think of Peleliu, do you think of the men we fought? Or do you think of the mountain?" Malloy exhales. "The mountain." Horvath nods. "Me too." The ocean stretches endlessly before them. Somewhere in that vastness lies a small, jagged island, too small to change the war, yet large enough to carve itself permanently into the souls of every man who walked its ridges. Horvath grips the railing tighter. I keep wondering, he says quietly, if the men still trapped in those tunnels ever realized the war was over. Malloy swallows hard. If any were alive. Horvath looks out at the stars. Alive or not, they're still there. A swell rocks the ship gently. The metal hull groans. And for a fleeting instant, so brief he almost doubts it, Horvath hears a deep, distant rumble rising through the steel. Not tapping, not whispers, just breath. He closes his eyes. The sensation passes, fading back into the hum of engines and wind. But the meaning lingers. You know, Malloy says softly, when we go home, people will ask about the battles, about the worst part. What will you tell them? Horvath opens his eyes and answers without hesitation. That the hardest fight wasn't the enemy. It was the place. Malloy nods slowly. He understands. The ship reaches San Diego at sunrise. Crowds on the pier wave flags. Bands play martial music. Families shout names and hold signs. For many Marines, it feels like stepping out of a nightmare into a forgotten dream. For Horvath, it feels like stepping off one battlefield and carrying another inside his chest. As he walks down the gangway, applause rises like a tide. A child hands him a flower. A woman kisses a stranger. The world is bright, loud, alive. Everything Peleliu was not. But as Horvath takes his first steps onto American soil, the scent of salt air shifts. For a heartbeat, he smells dust, burned coral, hot stone. He stops. The world continues around him. Celebration ricochets across the docks. But Horvath stands very still, listening. He hears nothing, of course. No voices in tunnels. No heat rising from vents. No echo of footsteps behind him. Only silence. But it is not the silence of peace. It is the silence he once felt when standing atop Bloody Nose Ridge after the last chamber collapsed. The silence of something that does not die, only rests. He bows his head. Peleliu is far away. But the mountain remains. Not as a ghost. Not as a haunting. But as a memory carved into the stone of every man who survived it. Horvath whispers into the morning light, barely audible even to himself. I remember. And in that whisper lies the truth no report, no medal, no historian's footnote will ever fully capture. Some battlefields stay where they are. Others follow you home. And a few, like Bloody Nose Ridge, become part of the man who walked them. With one final breath, he turns away from the sea and walks into the crowd, leaving the war behind him, but carrying the mountain forever.